Welcome back to these series of lectures. This is our last group of lectures. We're talking about European exploration. So what I want to do here is talk about these three authors and the arguments they made in some very widely known books, among historians at least. And the second of these books is very widely known for a popular audience, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. So let's start with Alfred Crosby, Ecological Imperialism. Crosby makes the arguments that there are little Europes scattered around the world in temperate zones. And I want to go through this argument a little bit to give you a little more depth to this discussion. Crosby says that Europeans live in large numbers and in national units from the Atlantic to the Pacific, both north and south of the equator. Crosby says that the Europeans established these new Europes, lands that are thousands of miles from Europe and thousands of miles from each other. He makes the argument that Australia's population is almost all European in origin. So is New Zealand's. A huge percentage of the population of South America is European in origin. Argentina and Uruguay are almost, I think, more than 90% European in origin. Over 80% of the population north of Mexico is European, of European descent. Crosby asks, he says, what do all these little Europes have in common? The answer, they export very large quantities of food and have since their beginnings. Where are these or little Europes? They're scattered geographically, but they're located in similar latitudes. They're located in the temperate zones, north and south, which is to say they share a very similar climate. The regions that today export more foodstuffs of European preference, that is grains and meat, 500 years ago had no wheat, no barley, no rye. No cattle, no pigs, no sheep, no goats whatsoever. This is pretty astounding when you think about it. The Europeans have established little Europes around the world that produce those things that were indigenous to European culture, these domesticated plants and animals, and now they have recreated that in the Western Hemisphere and in the Southern Hemisphere. Crosby his argument takes a turn here when he tries to explain why the Western Hemisphere and Australia, New Zealand, why they did not have large mammals available for domestication. He says that before the last ice age, the Americas were as rich in large animals as the Old World. Australia and New Zealand also had large animals. Crosby says, in general, the world lost more kinds of large land animals in the millennia around the end of the Pleistocene. This is about 13,000 years BCE. This is the last ice age. We lost more large mammals during this time period than at any other time. He said, in no areas were the losses as great as in the Americas and in Australia. He goes on, he says, a few thousand years later, this wave of extinctions reached the last large islands to be inhabited by humans, New Zealand and Madagascar, the large island off the east coast of Africa. You start to see a pattern here as humans arrive in the Americas, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Madagascar. Shortly after humans arrive in these places, the large land mammals disappear and become extinct. Why is this? Crosby makes the argument that large animals in the Americas and in Australia did not have the benefit of hundreds of thousands of years adjusting to the human presence. They had not learned to be frightened of humans, how to avoid human hunters. The consequence, of course, is that human hunters were able to slaughter these large animals in such quantities as to eliminate them entirely. So while the the forest and the plains of North America once had horses and just a variety of large mammals. These were wiped out by the humans who had migrated from Siberia across the Bering Land Bridge into North America. Crosby goes on. He says the mastodon had been wiped out 5,000 or 6,000 years ago in the same revolution that had killed off the mammoth. Again, human hunters destroying these species. The American mastodon vanished about 13,000 years BCE. That is the Pleistocene extinctions. Its demise, the mastodon's demise, was part of a wave of disappearances that have come to be known as the Pleistocene megafauna extinction. Again, Pleistocene referring to the last ice age, mega, large, fauna, animal, large animal extinction. Were the Australian extinction an isolated event? Maybe it's just chance. Maybe there were other factors involved. But when you bring all these different examples together, it begins to look as though Homo sapiens is a sort of ecological serial killer. As he inhabits new lands, he wipes out the large animals that live there for their food, their fat, the bones, the fur for clothing. Crosby goes on, he says, within 2,000 years of the appearance of Homo sapiens, most of these large, unique species were gone. According to current estimates, within that short interval, North America lost 34 out of its 47 species of large mammals. South America lost 50 out of 60. So when humanity shows up on the scene, it can be a very dangerous thing indeed for other creatures. Now, the second of the books that I want to sort of briefly provide you with the arguments that they make is Jared Diamond's very popular book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies. The argument here is essentially that Europeans had distinct advantages in spreading their little Europes around the world. Diamond begins by saying the basic question to be answered is, why did Europeans reach and conquer the lands of the Native Americans and not vice versa? Our starting point would be the comparison of Eurasian and Native American societies as of 1492. Diamond goes on to say that the largest population replacement of the last 13,000 years has been the one resulting from the recent collision of the Old World with the New World as a result of Columbus. He says in Eurasia, varieties of domesticated animals had existed for millennia, providing food, clothing, tools, labor, energy. And of course, in the Western Hemisphere, in the New World, the large animals had been wiped out. Of course, in the Old World, these large animals had also been associated with man long enough that they knew the danger that accompanied man. So this is an enormous set of differences between the Old World and the New World. The Old World will send its explorers, the Europeans, out into the New World, and they will have these advantages that they'll take with them. Diamond repeats part of Crosby's argument here, talking about the Pleistocene extinction events. And he makes the point that if it had not been for these extinctions, that the course of world history might have been dramatically different, that the peoples of the New World might have had much greater wealth and technology, and might indeed have explored the Old World instead of the way it actually turned out. Diamond goes on to say that in the Americas, there were two empires, the Aztecs and the Incas, which resembled their Eurasian counterparts in size, population, diversity, religions, and origins in the conquest of smaller states. He said that in the Americas, these were the only two political unities capable of mobilizing the resources for public works or war on a scale practiced in Europe. In Europe, Diamond says that there are 7 European states capable of this: Spain, Portugal, England, France, Holland, Sweden, and Denmark. That these all had the resources to acquire American colonies between the time of Columbus and 1666. He said that in the Americas there are many chieftains, but these tended to be much smaller states. He said the rest of the Americas were organized only at the tribal or at a much smaller level. And Diamond goes on to say that another factor in European success is literacy, the ability to write. He says that most Eurasian states had literate bureaucracies, including the church, and in some significant fraction of the population of these European societies were also literate. He says that writing empowered European societies by facilitating political administration, economic exchanges. Writing also motivated explorers and helped guide exploration and conquest. Diamond goes on to say that European societies enjoyed big advantages over Native American societies in food production, in deadly pathogens, in technology, including weapons made of steel, in political organization, and literacy. And then finally, Diamond says that there's another factor here that may account for European advantages. He says that that the Eurasian continent is laid out east to west, unlike the American continents, which run generally north to south. He says this permitted diffusion without change in latitude and associated environmental variables. In other words, both plants and animals could migrate east and west across this vast Eurasian continent and remain in similar climate zones. In the New World, you move north to south and you move through dramatically different climate zones, which impede the migration of both plants and animals. So that's Crosby's and Diamond's arguments. I'll come back in the last section and we'll talk about the argument made by Yuval Harari. Thank you.